"We're streamlining operations," Jordan Whitman declared, not even bothering to sit down. "No room for legacy baggage. You're being let go." I stared at the 30-year-old who had been CEO for precisely 6 hours and 43 minutes. The glossy Wharton MBA diploma on the wall behind him still had a fingerprint-smudged frame. "I see," I said calmly, despite the jolt running through my chest. 10 years at Halston Dynamics wiped away in a 10-second declaration. "May I ask why?" Jordan's lips curled in what I assume he thought was a confident grin. "My father may have needed guidance through contracts and compliance, but I'm steering us into a leaner, faster future. Less red tape, more action." "Modernization." I nodded, glancing at the files I'd been reviewing before his assistant called me up. Ironically, one of them contained my own carefully negotiated employment agreement. "I'll need that in writing," I said, standing from what had been Raymond Whitman's chair until his quiet retirement last Friday. "HR will have your termination paperwork," Jordan said flatly, already focused on his laptop. "Security will escort you out." "Standard procedure," I murmured, collecting my pen and leather notepad. I'd handled worse negotiations, even brokered million-dollar resolutions under tighter pressure. "Thank you for the opportunity to serve." There was a flicker of confusion across Jordan's face at my composure, but he quickly smoothed it over with another smug smile. "Best of luck, Meredith." The security officer met me in silence outside my office. As I filled a cardboard box with my few personal effects, my phone buzzed with messages from coworkers who had watched my quiet exit from the executive wing. I didn't reply. I had something more important to focus on. In my bottom drawer was a manila envelope containing a hard copy of my employment agreement, one that Raymond Whitman himself had amended just 2 years earlier when Arcadia Group made an aggressive offer to lure me away. "All set?" the guard asked awkwardly. He knew me, of course. Everyone at Halston knew me as the closer, the woman you called when a deal was collapsing or compliance was on fire. "Almost," I replied, sliding the agreement into my tote. "Just need to say a few goodbyes." But I didn't. I walked past stunned faces, entered the elevator without a word, and stepped out into the cool morning air of Charlotte, North Carolina. Once inside my car, I finally allowed myself a breath. I opened my bag and unfolded the agreement, flipping to the page I knew better than any client contract. There it was, my severance package, the acceleration clause, the non-compete waiver, and the golden trigger Charles had insisted on if I were ever terminated without cause. A slow smile crept across my face. Jordan Whitman had just made the most expensive rookie mistake of his life. A smile crept across my face. Jordan Whitman had just made the most expensive mistake of his short-lived career. My journey at Halston Dynamics began a decade ago when I was 27 and fresh out of Georgetown law, hungry to prove myself. Specializing in contract law, I had blanketed every major corporation in the Southeast, with resumes hoping one would see past my lack of corporate experience. Raymond Whitman did. He interviewed me himself, intrigued by my annotated sample agreements and the blunt notes I'd scribbled in the margins. Most attorneys just say, "Yes," he'd said, leaning back in his worn leather chair. "I need someone who'll tell me when I'm about to step off a cliff." I was hired within 48 hours. Over the years, I became much more than a legal review specialist. I was the person Raymond called when a supplier breached terms, when an investor needed reassurance, or when a government regulation shifted overnight. I rewrote contracts that protected our profit margins, shielded us from litigation, and negotiated terms that elevated Halston into an industry leader. Then 2 years ago, Arcadia Solutions tried to lure me away with a staggering compensation package. I was tempted. But Raymond countered not just with matched pay and better benefits, but with an ironclad employment agreement that reflected my true value. It included a golden parachute clause, 12-month severance at full salary, immediate vesting of stock options, and most importantly, a trigger clause, guaranteeing payout if I was terminated without cause. "You're family now," Meredith Raymond had said as we signed the paperwork. "This company isn't what it is without you." And I believed him. For 8 more years, I gave Halston Dynamics. Everything long nights, difficult negotiations, tough calls. Then last month, Raymond announced his retirement. We all knew his son Jordan would take over. He'd been groomed for the role, even if he lacked real leadership grit. But none of us anticipated how swiftly he'd begin dismantling the very foundation his father had built. In the final weeks before the transition, I noticed his sidelong glances in meetings. His expression was calculating, suspicious even. When I presented our compliance and risk audit, he waved off my analysis as paranoid and old school. Raymond Everloyal defended my work, but I saw what was coming. I started quietly updating my resume. What I didn't expect was the speed and coldness of Jordan's decision. No discussion, no performance review, no restructuring justification. Just a flat, "You're done," from a man who didn't understand what he'd inherited. As I drove through uptown Charlotte that evening, I wondered if Jordan had even read my file before slamming the door on a decade of loyalty. That night, I laid 2 documents side by side on my dining room table: my meticulously negotiated employment agreement and the HR termination form that had misspelled my name. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, and the consequences for him just beginning. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Leonard Phillips," came the voice. On the other end. "Leonard, it's Meredith Langston." "Meredith, to what do I owe the pleasure? How are things over at Halston?" I took a slow breath. "That's actually why I'm calling. I was let go this morning." A pause. "You're joking. Raymond fired you." "Not Raymond Jordan. Raymond retired last week." There was a much longer pause this time. "I see. Well, his loss could very well be someone else's gain." "Before you go on," I said, gently cutting him off, "I should mention I had a contract in place. One with significant termination provisions. Do tell." I walked him through the details. My golden parachute full-year severance, immediate equity, vesting the waiver on non-compete, and the trigger clause for early termination without cause. Leonard gave a low whistle. "That's one hell of a safety net. I don't think Jordan even looked at it before giving the order." "Well, this is convenient timing," he said, his tone shifting from casual to curious. "We're expanding our contract division here in Charlotte, and we could use someone who knows Halston's legal landscape inside and out." I smiled into the phone. "I thought you might say that." We talked for almost an hour. He laid out what the expansion would look like: new client acquisition, competitive positioning, building out compliance protocols. I asked the right questions. He offered a verbal commitment that nearly doubled my Halston salary. A formal offer would be emailed first thing in the morning. After we ended the call, I sat back in my dining room chair looking at the contrast of documents spread out in front of me. One was a hastily drafted termination notice complete with typos and generic HR phrasing. The other, a contract meticulously built over months of careful negotiation. Jordan had no idea what kind of opportunity he'd just handed me. My phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jenna, my longtime assistant. "Are you okay? Everyone's in shock. And if you believe this story isn't over yet, because real growth rarely ends in a single chapter, hit that subscribe button. There's more to come, and I'd love for you to be there when the next part unfolds." I typed back, "I'm fine. Just surprised by the timing." She replied almost immediately. "Raymond's flying back tomorrow. He cut his retirement cruise short." That stopped me. Raymond had been planning that month-long getaway for years. If he was flying back now, Jordan must have told him, and the fallout was likely already beginning. "Thanks for the update. Keep me posted." I placed my phone aside and began gathering the documents into a neat folder. Tomorrow would be interesting, but not for the reasons Jordan expected. He thought he was asserting control-flexing power as a new CEO. But in reality, he'd just opened the very door I didn't even know I'd been waiting to walk through. I arrived at Halston Dynamics just after 9 years the next morning, not as an employee, but as someone with unfinished business. The receptionist did a double take as I walked through the glass doors, dressed in the same professional attire I had worn nearly every day for the past 10 years. "Miss Langston? We heard—" "Is Mr. Whitman in?" I asked calmly. Her eyes widened. "Yes. He came in early. He's in the executive conference room with Jordan. But I don't think—" "Thank you, Kelsey." I gave a polite smile and headed toward the elevator, the sound of my heels echoing against the polished tile floor. As the doors opened to the executive level, I could already hear the shouting. Raymond's voice, usually measured and controlled, boomed down the hallway. Did you even read her contract before firing her? I walked slowly toward the source, noting a handful of executives and assistants clustered nearby, all pretending to be occupied while shamelessly listening in. Jenna spotted me first. Her eyes went wide as she stepped forward. Meredith, what are you doing here? I have a meeting, I replied, my tone neutral. With who? Jordan's getting a verbal smackdown from his father. I nodded. No surprise there. Raymond had never been one to sit back while his company veered off course, even if he was officially retired. The conference room doors flew open. Jordan stormed out, his face flushed red. The color drained the moment he saw me standing calmly in the hallway. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. Before I could respond, Raymond appeared behind him. Unlike his son, he looked relieved. "Meredith, perfect timing. Please come in." He waved me forward, then turned to the gawking onlookers. Everyone else back to work. Inside the glass-walled conference room, the table was covered in documents. I noticed immediately that several copies of my employment agreement were among them. Sitting stiffly at the far end of the table was Tasha Brillman, head of HR, looking visibly uncomfortable. Ms. Brillman was just explaining to Jordan why your termination might pose complications, Raymond said gently, shutting the door behind us. Tasha cleared her throat. As I was saying, the agreement Meredith signed 2 years ago included several protective clauses, including, I know what it includes, I interrupted smoothly. 1 year of severance at my current salary, immediate vesting of all outstanding equity, a waiver of my non-compete, and a clause granting me full rights to consult with any competitor of my choosing. I paused for effect, turning my gaze squarely toward Jordan. And a $250, $1,000 early termination payout if fired without cause. Jordan's face shifted through disbelief, annoyance, and finally the panic of someone who just realized they hadn't read the fine print. Raymond watched his son, disappointment etched into his face. This, he said quietly, is exactly what I warned you about. And from across the room, I said nothing more because my contract already said it all. That can't be right, Jordan muttered, grabbing one of the contracts and flipping through the pages in a panic. Page 7, paragraph 4. I offered calmly. Raymond watched his son, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression a mix of disappointment and weary resignation. I tried to teach you, he said quietly, that the fine print always matters. This is exactly why. Jordan found the clause. His face went pale as he read it, jaw tightening with every line. But this is legally binding, he stammered. Signed by you and Raymond, I replied, finishing the sentence for him, and still fully enforceable. Raymond turned to me, his tone softening. Meredith, I want to apologize for my son's poor judgment. Your termination is rescinded, effective immediately. Your position, your office, everything will be reinstated. I had expected this. Raymond had always stood by those who earned his respect. But that wasn't why I had come back to Halston Dynamics that morning. I appreciate the gesture, I said, but I've already accepted a position elsewhere. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jordan dropping the contract onto the table with a thud. Where Raymond asked, though, I had a feeling he already knew. Arcadia Solutions, I answered. I start next Monday as their Director of Contract Strategy and Compliance. Jordan let out a sharp laugh. You can't, your non-compete was waived, I said smoothly upon my termination without cause. Page 9, paragraph 2. Raymond sank slowly into a chair, his face suddenly looking every bit of his 65 years. You've been planning this? No, I replied honestly. But when the opportunity came, I'd have been foolish not to take it. They'll want our clients, our pricing models, our supplier terms. Jordan said, his voice rising in panic. I raised a brow. All things I'm legally allowed to leverage. But for your peace of mind, my agreement with Arcadia specifically excludes the use of proprietary Halston materials. Leonard Phillips may be a competitor, I added, but he has a strong ethical line. He knows where it's drawn. Raymond nodded slowly. He and Leonard had been rivals for decades, but there had always been mutual respect. Then he asked a question I hadn't anticipated. "What do you want, Meredith?" I blinked. "Excuse me. You didn't need to come here. You could have walked away with the payout and a new job. So why are you really here?" I took a moment to consider his words. What did I want? Revenge validation. A simple apology for being tossed aside like a discarded memo. "I want what I'm owed," I said quietly. "And I want to make sure the people still here are treated with respect." Jordan scoffed. "This is a business, not a charity." "Your father built this business by valuing his people," I countered. "That's why Halston Dynamics kept its best talent and why you're hemorrhaging it now. It's why your suppliers are loyal." I continued even when competitors offer lower bids. "It's why your clients stick with Halston even under pressure. They trust this company to deliver." Raymond studied me, his brow furrowed in quiet reflection. "You care about this company?" he asked finally. "I gave 10 years of my life to it," I said honestly. "I'd rather not see all that work unraveled in 10 days. Jordan opened his mouth, but Raymond stopped him with a glance. "What are you proposing, Meredith?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table between us. "A consulting arrangement," I explained. "I'll assist with the transition of my responsibilities, advise on pending contracts, and provide insight on client dynamics and compliance protocols. In return," I continued, "I receive the full compensation outlined in my termination clause, plus a consulting fee." Raymond picked up the folder and skimmed through the proposal, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've thought this through." "It's what you hired me to do," I reminded him. He passed the folder to Jordan. "Read it? Carefully this time?" Jordan took it with a sullen expression. As he flipped through the pages, I watched the flicker of recognition hit his eyes. He was beginning to see the value, even if his ego wouldn't let him admit it. "This gives her access to our operations, even while she's working for Arcadia," he protested. "With strict confidentiality terms," I countered. "And a clearly defined scope for what qualifies as proprietary information." "Leonard signed off on it already." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "You cleared this with Leonard." "It was a condition of my acceptance," I said. "They get my skills without the legal mess." Jordan tossed the folder back onto the table. "This feels like blackmail." Raymond shook his head. "This is negotiation, something you'd understand better if you'd spent more time learning the business and less time assuming a title meant authority." The tension between them was thick old wounds suddenly laid bare in the boardroom. Tasha excused herself quietly, leaving the three of us to navigate the fallout. "I'll need time to review this," Raymond said, closing the folder gently. "Of course," I replied. "But just so we're clear, my offer to assist with the transition expires at 5:00 p.m. today. After that, all communication goes through my attorney regarding the termination terms." Jordan's face flushed. "So you're giving us an ultimatum now?" "I'm being realistic," I said calmly. "Arcadia expects my full attention. They've already been generous in allowing this window." Jordan looked away, but Raymond kept his eyes on me. "You're still protecting the company," he said quietly. I nodded once. "Because it used to stand for something. I'd like to leave it with some of that still intact." "I won't ask them to wait indefinitely," I said. Raymond studied my face, searching for something resentment, maybe even a hint of vindictiveness, but found none. He gave a slow nod. "You were always fair, Meredith," he said quietly, "even when you had every reason not to be." He turned toward his son. "Jordan, step outside. I need a moment with Meredith." Jordan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Raymond's tone silenced him. With one final glare in my direction, he left the conference room, slamming the door harder than necessary. Raymond let out a weary sigh and ran a hand through his silver hair. "He has potential," he said, "but he lacks patience and humility. I thought giving him control would force him to grow into the role." He continued. "I see now that may have been premature." "It's not my place to comment on your decision regarding Jordan," I said carefully. Raymond offered a tired but sincere smile. "That's diplomatic of you. But we both know this isn't how I wanted things to end between Halston Dynamics and Meredith Langston. I felt an unexpected wave of emotion rise, memories of challenges overcome, clients retained, and deals saved. Business is business, I said softly, echoing a phrase he'd used with me more times than I could count. He nodded. Indeed. He picked up the consulting proposal again and glanced through it. I'll sign this, and I'll make sure Jordan understands every term along with the consequences of violating them. Thank you. But before you go, he added, his voice lowering slightly, I want to ask you something off the record. I tilted my head, intrigued. Go ahead. What would it take to bring you back? Not now, eventually, once things settle. The question caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting that. Honestly, I said after a pause, I don't know. Arcadia's offering things I never thought possible. And after what happened here, rebuilding trust would be a process. Raymond nodded slowly. Trust is hard to earn again, but not impossible. I gave it a moment of real thought. Halston would need to change the culture, the leadership mindset. Your son would need to show that he values the people behind the contracts, not just the numbers in them. That's a tall order, Raymond said. You asked what it would take? I replied, simply. He chuckled, a genuine sound that broke through the tension of the morning. So I did. He extended his hand. Whatever happens next, it's been an honor, working with you, Meredith. I shook his hand firmly. Likewise. Raymond? As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me again. One more thing, Jordan will hate this, but I'm going to require that he attend all your transition meetings. Consider it part of his education. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. That sounds appropriate. Outside the room, Jordan was pacing, face still red with frustration. He stopped when he saw me. Are you satisfied? Jordan demanded. You've completely undermined my authority on my first day. I regarded him calmly. You did that yourself when you fired someone without understanding the consequences. He stepped closer, voice dropping. This isn't over. Actually, I replied, matching his tone. It is. Your father just signed my consulting agreement, and you'll be attending every single transition meeting personally. Think of it as a crash course in contract management. The stunned expression on his face was almost worth the upheaval of the last 24 hours. That following Monday, I walked through the glass doors of Arcadia Solutions as their new director of contract management and compliance. My office overlooked downtown Charlotte, a far cry from the windowless interior cubicle I'd once occupied at Halston during my early years. Leonard Phillips greeted me in the lobby, grinning. He personally gave me the tour, introducing me to the legal and procurement teams and walking me through onboarding. I've been trying to recruit you for years, he said as we settled into his office over coffee. Though I didn't expect the opening to come this way. Life has a sense of humor, I replied diplomatically. Leonard chuckled. That's one way to put it. And the consulting arrangement with Halston Smart. We get your expertise without the litigation risk. It was the right thing to do, I said. Raymond built that company from nothing. I still respect that, even if I don't agree with how Jordan is running it. Leonard leaned forward, his tone more serious. The first transition meeting is tomorrow. You ready? I nodded. I've prepared detailed notes on every open contract. The goal is a smooth handoff, not to create chaos. And Jordan, Leonard asked. He'll resist at first, but Raymond will keep him grounded. Leonard seemed satisfied with that. Good. We don't need the drama bleeding into our operations. Over the next few days, I settled into my new role. Word of my departure and the story behind it spread quickly through Charlotte's corporate scene. Former colleagues reached out, some stunned, others quietly probing for openings at Arcadia. I stayed neutral, neither fanning the flames nor slamming any doors. Reputation mattered. The first transition meeting at Halston was just as tense as I'd expected. Jordan sat stiff and silent, arms crossed, while I reviewed my documentation with the legal and procurement leads. I walked them through active vendor disputes, flagged contract renewal dates, and identified key client dependencies they'd need to manage in my absence. Raymond sat at the end of the table, listening intently and occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions. I kept things professional. No jabs, no theatrics. Jordan barely looked at me, but his silence was telling. He knew now this wasn't just about a firing. It was a lesson in consequences. Raymond observed from the head of the table, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions. When the meeting concluded, he pulled me aside near the door. "Thank you for doing this properly," he said quietly. "It would have been easy to leave them scrambling." "That wouldn't help anyone," I replied. "Least of all your clients caught in the crossfire." He nodded, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. Always the consummate professional. Over the next 2 months, I balanced my time between settling into my new role at Arcadia and fulfilling my consulting duties at Halston Dynamics. The transition meetings, once thick with tension, became increasingly productive as Jordan began to realize the value of what I was offering. He started asking questions. Sometimes he even took notes, a far cry from the dismissive posture he'd assumed during our first encounter. During what was scheduled to be our final transition meeting, Jordan approached me while I packed up my materials. "I underestimated you," he said, his tone steady, "and I misjudged the situation." I looked up, surprised by the candor. It almost sounded like an apology. "We all make mistakes," I said, "especially when we're new to a role." Jordan frowned slightly. "That's what my father says, but I don't think it excuses anything." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But owning the mistake is the first step toward not repeating it." He nodded, considering that. "The consulting agreement ends next week," he said. "Would you consider extending it? More limited in scope, just for the more complex contracts." I hadn't expected that. "I'm not sure it's appropriate, given my position at Arcadia." "I've already spoken to Leonard Phillips," he said. "He's open to it as long as the boundaries are clearly defined." That caught me off guard. I made a mental note to speak with Leonard when I got back to the office. "Why me?" I asked. "There are plenty of consultants who specialize in contract compliance." Jordan hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because you know our systems inside and out, and because I need to prove to my father that I can learn." I studied him carefully. The arrogance from before had softened into something more measured. "Was it humility?" "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's all I can promise." Jordan nodded. "That's fair." As I walked out of Halston Dynamics, perhaps. For the last time, I reflected on how far things had come from that first chaotic day. What I had initially seen as a setback had turned out to be a professional turning point. Not only had I secured fair compensation, but I'd protected my reputation and unexpectedly earned a measure of respect from the very person who once dismissed me without thought. At Arcadia, I was thriving. My deep insight into Halston's internal workings had already allowed us to strengthen client retention and fine-tune key contract strategies. The future, for once, felt entirely in my control. My insights into Halston's contract structures had proven invaluable. Leonard was more than pleased with my performance. Within weeks, I was asked to lead a cross-functional team focused on optimizing client negotiation strategies. The scope of my work had already expanded well beyond the role I was hired for. It was clear this wasn't just a new job. It was a launch pad. And all of it had begun because Jordan Whitman didn't bother to read the fine print. That one oversight shifted everything. What could have been a bitter ending had turned into the start of the most rewarding chapter of my career. I had influence autonomy, and for the first time in years, a seat at a table where my expertise was recognized without question. Sometimes when I paused to reflect, I realized something powerful. The best kind of revenge isn't loud or vengeful. It doesn't involve taking someone else down. No, the best kind of revenge is rising so far above the mess they left behind that they have no choice but to look up to you. And Jordan, he'd be looking up for a long time. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was leading. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told your value was negotiable, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. What happened to me wasn't just a setback. It was a reminder to know your worth, document everything, and never let someone else's short-sightedness define your future. If you believe in standing your ground with dignity and rising higher because of it, show your support. Leave a comment, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let's build a space where experience, integrity, and quiet strength are celebrated. I'll be reading every word you write.